The moment my mother decided to judge me publicly, everything that had been simmering for 8 years finally boiled over. My name is Audrey, and I was 26 years old that Christmas night in Boise. A contractor who built her company from nothing yet was still the family's invisible disappointment. My business was the reason this lavish table was set, the reason my sister still had tuition money, but to my mother, I was simply an embarrassment. She looked straight at me, her smile tight and polite for the guests, and her voice carried just enough volume to silence the room. "You are the one who is both stupid and pretentious," she said, cutting right through the background music. "Just look at your sister and learn from her." My sister Mallory, pretending to diligently read a heavy academic book she'd brought to the dinner, slowly lifted her eyes just enough to let a smug smirk settle on her face. That smirk, the same look of superiority she'd worn for years, was the final trigger. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't drop my fork. I calmly squeezed the piece of shortbread cake in my hand until the delicate frosting cracked, looked straight into my mother's eyes, and said clearly, "Then this stupid one will stop paying for your sister's largest monthly financial support." Mallory choked on the hard candy she was sucking on, coughing violently, until her fake academic book slipped from her trembling hand and hit the polished hardwood floor. The sheer, heavy silence that descended felt like an actual physical weight pressing down on the entire room. Before I take you inside my story, please tell me this honestly: what time is it where you are? And which city are you watching from, so I can truly gauge how far my story has traveled? Comment your answer, hit the like button, and subscribe if you want to understand the true cost of that tuition. To understand that crushing silence, I must take you back 8 years to a time when my father Arthur was still alive. Even then, the favoritism for my older sister Mallory was the dominant current in our household. She was the one with the high grades, the eloquent language, the one Mom dreamed would make us respectable in society. When I was 18, I received an acceptance letter to a solid regional business college. I was proud of the opportunity, knowing a degree in finance would be my ticket out of the mundane. I excitedly proposed a solution to my parents, explaining I would work 2 full-time jobs running shifts as a busser and a cleaner to cover my tuition and living expenses. I told them I wouldn't need significant financial aid beyond basic loans, determined to stand on my own 2 feet without burdening the family. Dad simply looked nervous, but Mom Sylvia didn't even pretend to be proud of my initiative. She called a meeting with Mallory later that night in the kitchen, and I could hear their hushed conspiratorial voices from my bedroom. Mallory, who was already enrolled in an expensive liberal arts program, presented the cynical argument to Mom my proposed major was too common, too blue-collar, even with the eventual degree. Mallory insisted that her field, comparative literature, was rare, essential, and according to her, the true path to elevated status and prestige. She twisted my desire to work, arguing to Mom that if I wasted my energy on jobs and school, I would be unable to provide consistent financial support for her, Mallory, who was clearly destined for greatness and required full focus on her academic load. She argued that my work would destabilize her superior intellectual pursuits. The next morning, Mom sat me down, her face drawn, and told me, "Audrey, we simply cannot afford both dreams, and we won't risk Mallory's future. Mallory is already on the superior path. Your job now is to be practical. You are too ignorant to see the true value in what your sister is doing. Stay here, work, and support the family's real future." I tried to argue, clutching my acceptance letter, but Mom was firm. She wouldn't sign the loan papers, and she wouldn't co-sign my apartment lease. They actively chose to sacrifice my potential future to inflate Mallory's ego and societal status. I placed the letter in a drawer, already knowing my fate. I took a full-time job cleaning office buildings and a part-time job waiting tables my academic life over, before it had begun, all because my sister's perceived potential was deemed more valuable than my tangible effort and hard work. The blatant act of sabotage quickly morphed into a desperate, heavy obligation, solidifying my new role. Just a few short weeks after Mom and Mallory forced me to abandon my college plans, Dad suffered a massive, unexpected heart attack and died almost instantly while working in his office. The loss was devastating emotionally and financially, as Dad had minimal life insurance. The small nest egg we had disappeared overnight, entirely swallowed by unexpected funeral costs and outstanding debts that Dad had never mentioned. That day, I retrieved my acceptance letter from the drawer, looking at the name of the college, and slowly tore it into small pieces, accepting my new inevitable role as the sole provider. I transitioned immediately into being the primary financial pillar of the family. The unspoken agreement Mom and Mallory had forged was suddenly and tragically ratified. Mom lost in her profound grief and clinging tighter than ever to Mallory, as the family's only hope for dignity doubled down on my new duty. "Your father would have wanted this," she repeatedly insisted, turning my sacrifice into a sacred, unassailable obligation. I didn't return to waiting tables. Instead, I poured myself into securing commercial cleaning contracts, working 12 to 14 hours a day, focused solely on generating steady revenue. My hands were perpetually stained with chemicals and grime. My body ached every morning, but the income was real, and the family desperately needed it. Mallory, meanwhile, continued her costly university life, never once suggesting she take a gap year or even work a part-time job to ease the burden. She was the precious, fragile intellectual, the one who simply could not be distracted by trivial labor. She spent the small allowance I sent her on books, yes, but mostly on maintaining the expensive lifestyle expected of a student at her privileged institution. Pricey coffee shops, exclusive study retreats, and the occasional designer piece to maintain her polished image among her peers. Her calls home were never to ask about my physical well-being, but always to detail how stressful her latest papers were and how much more money she urgently needed for obscure, non-essential research materials. I never once argued with her demands. I just moved the necessary funds from my business account. My silence and relentless work ethic were perpetually interpreted by both Mom and Mallory as evidence of my compliance, proof that I had accepted my lower station in life without complaint. Mom would often tell her close friends right in front of me that I had a good heart, but frankly lacked the intellectual capacity to truly succeed in academia, which was why I was better suited to working with my hands. Every time she spoke those words describing my immense sacrifice as a mere lack of ability, a substantial piece of my genuine affection for them died completely. The next 5 years saw a huge shift in my financial reality, but none whatsoever in my family's ingrained perception of me. Driven by pure necessity, a healthy dose of resentment, and an inherent business sense I had always possessed, I moved past simple cleaning contracts. I successfully identified profitable gaps in the local market, specializing in minor home renovations and commercial office refitting jobs, eventually launching my own highly successful firm, Audrey's Solutions. I learned plumbing, basic electrical work, and structural planning through sheer force of will, long nights of studying trade manuals and copious YouTube tutorials, the exact ignorant route my family feared and despised. By my mid-20s, my company was turning a net profit in the high six figures annually, regularly contracting large commercial properties and employing a reliable, growing crew. I had achieved genuine, tangible success, the kind that built measurable equity and guaranteed a stable future. Yet when I came home for Sunday dinner, stained with drywall dust and wearing my worn work boots, I was still consistently treated as the family's failure. I would try to share details about landing a $250,000 contract or successfully hiring my 10th permanent employee, but the conversation would always pivot away from me abruptly. Mom would immediately interject, "That's lovely, dear, but Mallory just finished a 20-page abstract on the post-structuralist implications of urban graffiti. That's real work, Audrey. That requires genuine intellectual thought." Mallory, meanwhile, had seamlessly transitioned her excessive financial demands from undergraduate tuition to the even more exorbitant PhD expenses. She called me a functional capitalist who simply wouldn't understand the complex nuances of her lofty academic pursuits. She spoke about her life at the university like it was a grand spiritual quest for enlightenment, while dismissing my work as merely moving matter around or scrubbing stains. One Christmas, I bought Mom a brand new mid-sized sedan with cash. She accepted the keys politely, but immediately noted to the assembled guests that it wasn't the European model her friend's daughter had driven. She then spent the entire rest of the evening praising Mallory for getting a minor research grant worth $750, emphasizing tirelessly that Mallory had earned it through intellect, not my brute force labor. The substantial money I provided, which now covered Mallory's rent for an expensive off-campus apartment, her utilities, her car payment, and almost all of her exorbitant tuition, was treated like a monthly tax levied upon me, a required tithe for the sin of my unintellectual success. The relentless routine of contempt would have likely continued indefinitely had Mallory not escalated her financial demands into the realm of the truly absurd. My business partner Vince, a seasoned contractor who saw my true financial reports and recognized the scale of the abuse, was the only person outside the family who knew the full scope of my family's financial drain. It was a Tuesday evening, barely a week before the highly anticipated Christmas dinner. My phone rang. It was Mallory, her voice tight, but dripping with extreme faux humility and urgency. "Audrey, I need a significant immediate transfer," she stated flatly, skipping all pleasantries. "My advisor is organizing a mandatory Parisian study tour to examine Baroque sculpture for my dissertation. It's crucial for my graduation. I need exactly $15,000 transferred by Friday." The request was audacious in its simplicity. I managed to keep my voice flat despite the shock. $15,000, Mallory. That's nearly half a year's tuition and living expenses combined. She immediately scoffed dismissively. "Do not be so ignorant, Audrey. This is an investment in my career. Your little company profits from grunt work. My degree will actually contribute something significant to global culture. Send the money." It was without a doubt the final straw. It wasn't actually the money. I could absorb the $15,000 easily if it were a legitimate expense. It was the sheer audacity and the constant, unwavering use of intellectual superiority as a calculated weapon against me. I hung up the phone and immediately called Vince. I tasked him with digging deep into Mallory's academic record and her personal financial spending, offering a very substantial bonus for speed and absolute discretion. Within 48 hours, Vince provided the undeniable concrete truth. Mallory was not only not close to finishing her dissertation, but she was academically floundering badly. She had failed 2 major core classes the previous semester, had been placed on irreversible academic probation, and her supposed Parisian study tour was actually a highly expensive non-credit leisure trip organized by a dubious tour group with absolutely no academic value whatsoever. Furthermore, the substantial money I sent monthly for her textbooks and research was being systematically siphoned off to pay for exclusive gym memberships, designer clothes, and to cover the entire living expenses of her new unemployed musician boyfriend. I scrolled through the multiple photos Vince had attached: Mallory at a beach resort, Mallory drinking champagne, Mallory posing with the academic book she'd never opened. The betrayal was complete. It wasn't just incompetence, it was calculated theft perpetuated by willful, sustained deceit. I sat in my silent office looking at the spreadsheet of my life's labor, the full $225,000 I had poured into her entire facade over 8 years, and a quiet, cold clarity settled over me. There would be no more funding, no more silence, and absolutely no more pretending. I carefully printed all the irrefutable evidence, folded the stack, and placed it inside a crisp manila envelope. The stage was set, and Christmas dinner would be the final destructive act. That cold Christmas Eve, I drove my dusty 4-year-old crew cab pickup, the same truck I routinely used to haul drywall and lumber, up the immaculate cobblestone driveway of my childhood home. The house itself looked incredibly beautiful, decked in expensive, twinkling lights and elaborate decorations Mom had insisted upon, all coincidentally financed by the profits from my last major renovation project. A project Mom had told her friends was just a favor for a high-end client. As I walked in through the heavy front door, the air was thick with the scent of expensive wine and the sickly sweet aroma of forced high society holiday cheer. Relatives and Mom's upscale judgmental friends, the ones who had only ever heard the highly curated flattering version of our family story, milled about, sipping cocktails and whispering in hushed tones. Mom Sylvia looked spectacular, dressed in a festive designer gown, playing the role of the elegant, gracious hostess to absolute perfection. Mallory was predictably the undisputed star of the show. She was circulating the room holding a glass of chilled Prosecco, animatedly discussing some obscure philosophical concept she'd clearly just Googled minutes before. She wore the same practiced airy superiority she'd mastered over the past 8 years of being a perpetual student. Mom greeted me with a brief, obligatory air kiss on the cheek, her eyes immediately scanning my simple wool dress and work-worn hands for flaws. She didn't bother to ask how my work was progressing, or if I had even managed to take a single day off recently. Instead, she guided me toward the dining room table, her voice dropping into a barely audible but highly public conspiratorial tone as she addressed my appearance. "Audrey, darling, you look utterly exhausted." She sighed dramatically loud enough for a nearby cousin to hear the entire exchange. "It's such a genuine shame that your line of work is so physically demanding. I so wish you could find something that actually uses your mind for once." The cutting, passive-aggressive insult was the familiar prelude to the main event. Once everyone was finally seated just before the first toast was to be made, Mom stood up, lifting her crystal glass high. She launched into a prolonged, self-congratulatory speech about the Benton family's intellectual heritage, specifically praising Mallory's impressive commitment to high culture and her supposed upcoming crucial study tour to Paris. Mom then paused dramatically, allowing the silence to stretch and build tension before turning her gaze deliberately to me. "I just feel so proud because some people in this family," she purred, looking directly at my face with a practiced sneer, "understand what real achievement looks like, the kind that elevates us above the common. And some people, unfortunately, are so ignorant they mistake dirty labor for actual value." The final devastating cue arrived immediately after Mom's vicious public performance. Mallory allowed herself a slow, deliberate smirk of triumph, a look that conveyed exactly how small and insignificant she thought I was in the grand scheme. The entire room was watching our interaction intently. That was the crucial moment. I reached for the cake, squeezing the shortbread just as I had pictured, and delivered the statement I had been preparing for weeks. My voice calm, even-tempered, and utterly devoid of all genuine emotion. "Then this stupid one will stop paying for your sister's largest monthly financial support?" The effect was instantaneous and physically jarring. Mallory seized up the hard candy she was sucking on, jamming painfully in her throat, causing her to jerk forward violently and cough until actual tears streamed down her face. Mom's face went immediately white, her composed, elegant facade crumbling completely in a single painful moment of pure shock. "Audrey, stop this public scene now! You are absolutely ruining Christmas!" She desperately hissed at me, trying to force a weak, placating smile for the horrified, confused guests. I didn't acknowledge her frantic intervention. I simply reached under the table, pulled out the damning manila envelope, and slid it directly across the polished wood toward Mallory. "The substantial funds required for your spring semester are not forthcoming. I stated clearly, my voice cutting cleanly through Mallory's gasps and wheezes. Inside this envelope is the proof of your academic standing, probationary status, and 2 F grades from last semester. Also included are incriminating photos of your research trip in the Bahamas and a full itemized accounting of the $225,000 every single cent I have paid toward your academic performance over the last 8 years. The entire room exploded into stunned whispers and murmurs. Mallory finally caught her breath and shrieked, her face contorted by genuine fury and raw fear. "How dare you? You have absolutely no right to investigate my life. You're just jealous of my superior intellectual potential." Mom immediately shifted into her ingrained defense mode, turning her pure rage onto me. "You are acting like a malicious child. You want to kill her future just because you are too ignorant to understand the value of a degree." I rose slowly from my chair, my movement deliberate and final. "I took financial responsibility when no one asked me to," I replied, evenly ignoring her baseless accusation. "I built a successful company when I was constantly told I was too ignorant to learn. I paid over $200,000 while you publicly called me common labor. And now, I am completely done. Effective immediately, the company bank account is closing your supplementary credit card, and I am instructing my lawyer to revoke the lease agreement for your apartment, which I've been silently paying for in the company name. This family is no longer my problem." I didn't wait for the inevitable screaming match to escalate further. I simply walked away from the ruined Christmas dinner and moved toward the front door, leaving the silence, the crushing shame, and the full, terrifying weight of the truth settled squarely on the people I had supported for far too long. I closed the heavy front door behind me, the cold sound of the locking mechanism feeling like the final definitive period on a difficult, terrible chapter of my life. The next few weeks were inevitably chaotic. My phone was immediately besieged with hundreds of increasingly desperate messages and frantic calls from Mom, alternating rapidly between vicious, unfounded threats of public humiliation and sobbing, gut-wrenching pleas for just one more semester of financial help. Mallory also tried to contact Vince, my employees, and even the company accountant, but I had prepared thoroughly for that exact outcome, ensuring every line of communication was blocked, every bank account protected, and every legal avenue secured. My decision was absolutely final: no contact, no exceptions, and no explanation beyond the documents I had left on the table. The consequences for them were swift and utterly realistic in the economic landscape of America. Without the $4,000 monthly living payment from my secure company account, Mallory defaulted on her apartment rent within 30 days, facing immediate eviction from her luxury apartment, the one she had constantly boasted about being essential for her studies. Her academic probation quickly hardened into permanent expulsion. Without the tuition payment, the university automatically revoked her student standing and dropped her enrollment. The expensive prestige, the elaborate performance, the academic facade, it all collapsed completely because the $225,000 financial lifeline was suddenly gone. Mallory, who was far too proud to take any job other than a research position, eventually had to return home to Boise. But Mom Sylvia could not cope with a daughter who was merely a dropout with massive unsecured debt. The constant flow of high-value cash from my successful business stopped, forcing Mom to reluctantly sell the very house I had painstakingly renovated for them, downsizing dramatically and moving into a cramped, small apartment. The true source of their comfort and status was gone, and they were left with nothing but their fragile egos and their mounting debt. 2 years have passed since that Christmas dinner. My life is organized, predictable, and remarkably peaceful. My business has thrived. Vince and I have successfully opened a second location. I bought a small house, not a mansion, but a comfortable home I earned and control completely. I still occasionally see Mallory in the distance, though we do not speak. The last time was at a busy grocery store checkout line. She was wearing a name tag for a low-wage retail job she used to openly mock, and she stubbornly refused to make eye contact as I passed. I felt absolutely no triumph, only a quiet, resolute peace. The greatest lesson I learned is this: setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is an essential act of self-preservation. I spent 8 years believing that my personal value was defined solely by the extent of my sacrifice, thinking that my perpetual silence would somehow protect our broken relationships. In reality, my silence only taught them how far they could successfully push me without ever facing a consequence. My story is not one of revenge, but of clarity and liberation. I chose my own hard-earned peace over their temporary comfort, my self-respecting truth over their manipulative narrative, and my secure future over their perpetual approval. True value is not found in an expensive unearned degree, but in the integrity of dedicated hard work and the courage to firmly say no when you are being unjustly used. Remember this one vital thing: if your love or labor is only truly valued when it is silent and sacrificial, you are not supporting a family, you are funding an illusion. That illusion will always eventually collapse, but you absolutely do not have to collapse along with it.